contradiction is the ruling principle of the universe, and everything in phenomena, whether it's the physical world or the biological world or the social world, has its internal contradiction that gives motion to things, that internal strain. And much of the time that we Homo sapiens don't realize that no matter what sort of conditions we establish, no matter what government we establish at this point, there also will be that internal contradiction that will have to be resolved, and resolved in a rational, just way. And of course, that leads us somewhat, it's very vague on how to deal with it. And many times we claim actions are revolutionary when really they're not.
Yeah, that's Huey P. Newton on the William F. Buckley show. I feel that is a good clip to be a good introduction to Huey P. Newton because in it he talks about contradictions, which is a word he uses often, pretty much the way he defines it there. And he also mentions the word phenomenon, another word that he uses often. One of his more famous quotes is, power is the ability to define phenomena and make it act in a desired manner. And as one of the co-founders and main recognized person with the Black Panther Party, I feel he definitely embodied that, definitely personified that quote. So as this being the first episode of Words and Power, I feel it's only fitting that we started with Huey P. Newton, episode 1.
I have a friend who's almost dying for me to ask this question, if you will. The question is, during the Revolution of 1776, when the United States of America broke away from England, my friend would like to know, what side would you have been on during that time?
I remember reading about that question in Elaine Brown's autobiography, Taste of Power. I feel that question is a bit of a hint at Huey's sense of humor. William F. Buckley was a well-known conservative, celebrity conservative of that time. So as a modern-day revolutionary that he was, you know, that was the obvious question to ask, kind of twisting things on him, you know. George Washington being one of the heroes, if not the hero of the country, but at the same time, he was a revolutionary. He was fighting against the order of the time, the law of that day. So that right there is a hint of Huey P. Newton's humor. Huey P. Newton was born February 17th, 1942 in Monroe, Louisiana. His full name is Huey Percy Newton. He was named after the 40th Louisiana governor, Huey P. Long. He was the youngest of 7 and moved to Oakland in 1945 as part of the second Great Black Migration, and eventually founding the Black Panther Party in October of 1966. And yeah, let's get into some of his quotes.
I'm not a speaker even. I'm terrified of cameras, radios, and large groups. I only pretend that I'm not, and that's why I'm so belligerent with you and forceful and aggressive. That's to hide my fear.
And your superior theoretical position, why is it that you
You
don't have
flatter
more?
me saying that.
Well, no,
Really.
I'm accepting your definition of yourself.
Well, no, I say I like to think of myself as somewhat an organizer with
Yeah.
some expertise, but I'm not very good, really. If I were good, then America would be changed tomorrow or yesterday. But we're still struggling on precinct levels, making many turns and many maneuvers.
All right, that was two clips, also from the William F. Buckley show. And in it, he talks about another one of his well-known personality traits, and that is his fear of public speaking. You know, like most of the people who talk about seeing him speak, you know, the different autobiographies and biographies that I read, they mention, you know, you could see in the clip, he's, you know, not very comfortable with speaking. Some people say that may be rooted in the fact that, you know, despite eventually going on to get his doctorate, he graduated from high school as a functional illiterate. Excuse me, people talk about how long it would take for him to write some of his books because of his need to have to look up certain words and things like that. So I think that manifested in his insecurities about public speaking. Then on top of that, a lot of the things that he was talking about were pretty complex. He was well known for getting real deep into political theories, and sometimes he would lose people. You know, people wouldn't want to hear that at rallies. You know, if you really try to, you know, get into breaking down intercommunalism, one of his more popular theories. You know, I don't really think it's something you can really push at a rally. You know, you need something concise, something quick, something that people can repeat back. You know, so I think those things together kind of led to his insecurities towards public speaking. Something that a lot of people have. I have that. You know, I think a lot of other people do too. They say it's one of the biggest fears is speaking in public. And then also talk about his insecurities he feels as a leader. That's something else I read about. One of the things he was afraid of. He talked about what was that in, I think, David Hillier's book. He mentioned it. It was mentioned, and in Omiya's book it was mentioned. His fear after coming out of prison, once the party exploded after the Free Huey movement, his fear of returning to essentially, you know, an army, you know, ready to do whatever he said. You know, that's a lot of pressure for any person to deal with. And he had an agenda. He had a goal that seemed feasible. I hear a lot of people from the party, a lot of people from that time talk about their belief that they really thought they could achieve this. They really thought they could achieve the revolution they were going for. And so to not get that, you know, I can understand kind of blaming yourself for that somewhat to a certain extent. So to see such a powerful man, such a powerful leader, state these type of insecurities, to me, I think it's empowering because it encourages people and lets them know that you don't have to be a Superman, you don't have to be perfect. You know, Huey P. Newton, I'm sure if you okay, as I was saying, I was talking about the normal imperfections, human fallacies that people have and how that can be empowering for everyone else who may idolize or follow this person or may inspire to do things similar to what this person did. You know, it's good to know that just regular people, they did it, you can do it too. They're not perfect. They were imperfect while they were doing they were imperfect before they did these incredible things, possibly were imperfect while they were doing those incredible things, and went on to continue to be imperfect after they did those incredible things. And it doesn't take anything away from the incredible things that they did. They did it, you can do it too.
I would like to make this clear, and for the audience and for yourself. I don't know about Cho and Lai, but one thing that I'm not a Marxist. Not a Marxist. I think that the whole concept of what Marx tried to lay down as a scholar, a historian, a philosopher, was distorted, and people became priests of Marx and of other people. I'm not. I think that Marx was a scientist, and he tried to point out a very advanced method of analyzing phenomena that was called dialectical materialism. And you can't usher in dialectical materialism because that's the whole order and process that the universe goes through. In other words, I explained one of the principles is that contradiction is the ruling principle of the universe. It gives motion to matter, and contradiction is based upon internal strife. And that internal strife between inside of any physical thing seems to give it the ability to move and to be transformed. And societies are people, or my fellow revolutionaries, who think that you can usher in a social order through any sort of ideological proclamation. They're very wrong. The society itself strains to fight against colonialism, such as America did with England, and then after that you get a situation where workers, the unions, they struggle against the owners of the factories, and then you come up with some other sort of order, and it's much different than the formalities of the ballot. You don't know where it's really going to land until you become such a scientist, the people, till they can harness the forces that are in operation and set them in a direction that's most desirable.
All right, in this clip where he breaks down his definition of Marxism and how he feels he differs from it, I think you figure out, you learn quite a bit about, you learn a couple of things. One, actually you learn three things. One, you learn, the brilliance of his understanding of social science. And two, you learn another one of his more popular theories, dialectical materialism, one of the Marxist theories. And in it, as I'm looking up the definition, dialectical materialism, the Marxist theory adopted as the official philosophy of the Soviet communists, that political and historical events result from the conflict of social forces and are interpretable as a series of contradictions and their solutions. The conflict is believed to be caused by material needs. And so pretty much what he's saying is that you can't enforce dialectical materialism. It just happens through contradictions, through interaction. Things happen. Things progress. The example he gave was the Revolutionary War, but pretty much any war, any conflict, you push, in one direction far enough, eventually you're going to get some pushback, and people are the same way, and this is the way in which people go about doing it, through social interactions, and it doesn't always ends up being violent, but something happens, some type of reaction happens. And he was breaking that down and understanding that, and to understand that is no surprise that he ended up being, a great leader. And two, you also understand hint to his politics and the politics of the Black Panther Party. They were socialists by, you know, I don't think they had an official political stance. You know, they had actual members of the party run, I believe, underneath the Democratic Party at times, if I'm not mistaken. But they politically leaned more towards the socialist side of things. I'm not sure if a lot of Black America knows that, or a lot of mainstream Black America, I should say, as we prepare for this upcoming 2020 election. A lot of people were complaining that a lot of Black folks, or how do I put this? I heard a lot of complaints from at least establishment Black folks that, you know, what is socialism? This is not a socialist country. Why would people vote for socialism? And of course, you know, talking about Bernie Sanders when you mention socialism, but one, Bernie Sanders is not a socialist, he's a democratic socialist. What is the difference? Socialism is kind of more enforced. I would call it like communism light, but don't quote me on that, I'm no political scientist. But democratic socialism is what I consider myself to be, and what Martin Luther King Jr. considered himself to be as well. Democratic socialism is socialism, but kind of governed, but not kind of, but governed by the people, which is kind of similar to what democracy is supposed to be in the first place. But yeah, so so with that, I think it's important for you know, to understand that the Panthers were socialists. I feel kind of helps. I think should help people expand their political imagination. So this is not a, you know, stop voting Democrat, start voting Republican type thing or whatever. But it's just, you know, just expand your political imagination and realize, look at your true values, not what you're told you should value, but look at your life. What do you really value? And go to where you see that being addressed. That was a big part of the Black Panther Party's survival programs. The idea was to just address the people's needs and let them make the decision for themselves, let them see for themselves. You know, we are addressing, the Panthers are addressing the things that are important to you in your everyday life, despite being considered terrorists. So yeah, the Panthers lean more towards the idea of socialism. Oh, and the point I was trying to make kind of got lost track there, but one, you know, he is not, Bernie's not a socialist. And two, this country is kind of a hybrid of capitalism and socialism. Our social services like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, these are social services. You want social services in your community, in your country. When the country is powerful and as rich as this one, it makes total sense to have a strong social safety net. So then that, you know, that improves the quality of the life of your people, which in turn improves the quality of life of your entire country, your entire nation. But, you know, you gotta convince the people of that. So, and Huey P was trying to do that. And one of the ways that he was trying to do that was using or understanding dialectical materialism and letting it do its work by providing some of the social programs, the survival programs that they did, and letting that be a contradiction as to what the government was or was not doing. Some of these programs are so great, they're still using them now. We all know about the breakfast program. Well, the government, federal government, implements that based on what the Panthers did. Yeah, so dialectical materialism, a big part of Huey P. Newton's philosophy, big part of Huey P. Newton's thinking that led to him forming the Black Panther Party. And a lot of the a big part of his philosophy behind forming the survival programs.
I think probably I would have been on the side of George Washington. I'm not absolutely sure, because it remains to be established historically whether what we sought to prove at that point might not have been proved by more peaceful means. On the whole, I'm against revolutions. Though I think as revolutions go, that was a pretty humane one.
Yeah, you're not such a bad guy after all. My friend will be surprised to hear that. I hope he's listening.
His assumption was what?
Well, he was puzzled, but I think that he was inclined to believe that you've been on the side of the colonizers of England. But I'm pleased with the answer, and I agree with you. The only revolution that is worth fighting is a humane revolution. And so therefore, but
we call that rebellion.
by law, but you've already agreed that if you were in 1776, you probably would have chose Washington, and this definitely would have been against the law. And so I'm saying when we talk about organizing opposition, that no government in this world that I know about have the audacity at this point in the human being's limited freedom to organize an opposition against the authority any way he likes.
Yeah, just again, going back to talk of revolution, just two clips. I start the first clip is William F. Buckley answering the question. Answering the question of what side of the American Revolution would it be on? You know, surprising Huey P. Newton by saying George Washington. Truthfully, though, I don't think he would have. I think a lot of people kind of go with the flow, kind of go with the establishment, go with what's most popular, and it's easy to say in hindsight that you would be with the rebels, but I don't know, because oftentimes, you know, you'd be at that particular moment, he was face to face with one of the rebels, with a revolutionary, and I'm not sure if you had a chance to see that interview, but you know, William F. Buckley is a pretty smug person, or was a pretty smug person, and he was on full blast in this interview with Huey P. Newton. 1 minute. The thing is, when Huey talked about revolution, he was serious, and he talked about it in a way that the country's founding fathers talked about it. So much so that the 10th point of the Panther 10-point program comes straight from the Constitution. We, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one person to dissolve the political bonds which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. And he goes on, you know, look it up. But yeah, and he was pretty much saying he was doing what is his right as an American, as a human being, to fight for revolution.
The community development aspect
of the party. We were at the time that we were just creating we were planning our creation of a community school. We were having busing programs to prisons where we would pick up community people and take them to the various penal institutions.
This clip is from the documentary Eyes on the Prize. And yeah, it goes to what I was talking about and what he was talking about earlier, the programs, the survival programs. He's talking about those doing things that the Panther Party provided for the community that was needed, but you know, it could be provided by the government, but for whatever reason wasn't. And this is the big thing that they were doing instead of focusing on carrying guns, and this is kind of what led to the split between Huey and Eldridge that he talks about later. It actually talks about in this clip right here that I'm going to play.
I felt that we should turn away from the arms because too much had been made of them, and I thought that the arms had served their purpose as far as being a catalyst to gain enthusiasm of the community.
But what did you think was going to happen? I mean, were you aware that the federal government was on the Panthers' tail at that point?
Oh yeah, I was very well aware of that. Was one of the reasons that we didn't want the. We were.
I'm sorry, if you could just rephrase.
All right. During the period of '68, '69, the federal government had declared all-out war on the party, and they were breaking into headquarters across the chapters, breaking into chapter headquarters across the country, and filming weapons and saying that, look, they have guns. It was never mentioned that the guns were legal weapons. They were doing everything to make the community afraid of the party, and of course you can't organize when people are afraid of you. So I was inclined to try to develop more local politics, to run local members for various offices, and develop our 10-point program, which was a housing and food and health program.
So he kind of elaborates on the reason why they shifted away from carrying the guns. The guns helped make them a target for the government to crack down on them, and also made it easy to paint them as villains, as terrorists, as something that the community needed to be afraid of. And if you read a lot of the biographies, autobiographies on the Panther Party, stuff I've learned in my little amateur studies on the Panther Party, and that is a big majority of the black community at that time was afraid of the Panther Party and what they represented and their imagery, especially what would be considered the establishment blacks. Today that would be Al Sharpton, Kamala Harris, you know, pretty much them and anyone who saw rallying behind them. Well, back then, the establishment blacks of that particular time was not necessarily in favor of these black socialists carrying guns, you know, and understanding that the goal was to serve the people at the end of the day. So if the people are afraid of us, then we're not doing any, you know, we're not helping them. So they're afraid of the guns. The guns make us an easy target. They got rid of the guns, focused more on the programs, and that kind of served as a genesis or kind of a point for the split, because Eldridge on his side, straight hardcore, straight militant, carry more guns, let's use these guns. If you know the story of Bobby Hutton, little Bobby Hutton, one of the first members to join the party and the first to die. That shootout was instigated by Eldridge, arguably. Some people may feel differently, but he talks about it in an upcoming clip here. But ultimately, though, he was again showing his understanding of dialectical materialism and his understanding of how the community felt about the party and kind of the ripple effect of their actions throughout the community, and the type of ripple effect them carrying guns would have versus the ripple effect things like the breakfast program would have, and some of the other things they mentioned, riots to prisons and things like that, had a better effect.
Why did you feel it necessary to expel Eldridge Cleaver?
Of course, first that he left the party, and we thought that it was a good time for him to leave because in organizations, parties, and companies, you get very bright, articulate people, and they have great influence upon others, and people are impressed. And I've learned not to follow my first impression as I used to when I was younger. And but when you get a person in who's articulate, bright, eloquent, and also very hurt because of the oppression that he's gone through and driven somewhat sick, too sick to be in that position, but yet with great influence, he leads the whole administration, the whole organization down the drain.
By doing what? What was it that led you down the drain?
Well, when the party started in October 1966 in Oakland, we had the occasion as a strategy to arm ourselves in a police alert patrol where we would follow the police. We were very careful to follow city ordinance about gun regulation and state law and constitutional right. And but we realized it wasn't a principle of revolution or a principle of the party that you pick up the gun now, and the gun was the only thing that defined revolution. So it was a strategy that was mistook after I went to prison with Eldridge's influence, that the gun was not only the symbol of revolution, it was a revolution. So the rhetoric then only pointed not to our programs where we attempted to organize the communities, the black community in particular, so that we could create what was destroyed through our slavery so many years ago, and that's that comprehensive collection of institutions that we call community. We wanted to establish this, and we had to treat the issues that the people were most concerned about. Now, after I went to prison, then with his influence and much of the respect that I personally gave him, so it's my fault also, that the media, they enjoyed the big sensationalism of the gun this, the gun that. So in many ways that we set ourselves up for the murder that we received, and the violations we received upon our person. And the people then were afraid, no, this is not what we want, when we were not about that anyway. So these are things that we have to live with. Those are the mistakes, and one of the mistakes and one of the contradictions we have with our organization, but you have it with any. You have to be very careful and not be too swayed by just the eloquence of a person, that he should not have ever arrived at that position, which I personally appointed him to shortly after he had gotten out of Folsom Prison. And so Eldridge Cleaver is, I accept him as mainly my responsibility, that I contributed so much to almost the destruction of our party and so many fallen comrades who are now in their grave or in prison. These are the things that I have to live with.
So this is again back to the William F. Buckley interview, and Huey taking the blame for Eldridge being in the party any negative effect that he may have had in the party. This was in the midst of their beef, their fallout. So I forget exactly when this was recorded and when in the beef that it happened, but yeah, he talks again about the gun. Eldridge was really heavily in favor of carrying the gun, not just carrying the gun, but using the gun. While Huey understood that the gun was a great weapon, a great target to use against him. In fact, he knew all too well, because one of the more famous actions that the Black Panther Party did was going down to Oakland to protest the new gun law that's being enforced by Governor Ronald Reagan, with support by the NRA, arguably, ironically enough, I should say. And like people were saying now, back then, you notice that he's saying because they were carrying guns, they were made a target. And if you talk to Panthers from Panthers today, and you talk to anybody who was back during that time, and ask them about the idea of carrying guns today, they'd all tell you no, it wouldn't work. We've seen black folks get shot, for carrying guns. However, we've also seen a lot of white folks just walk around carrying guns out in the open, no problem. And sadly, the same thing that was true over close to 50 years ago when the Panthers did it, is still true today. Black folks are not allowed to carry guns out in the open like that. And if you really want gun legislation done, any type of proper gun control done, just give a bunch of black folks guns, let them go march. You'll have gun legislation being discussed by the end of the day, But yeah, so he was just talking about the importance of doing what was effective for the people, and carrying a gun at that particular time was no longer effective. Eldridge was in favor of that, and that was one of the main reasons for the split, for his reason on leaving, rather than being expelled, as Buckley stated or asked.
Well, they didn't drop to 200 when I came back from Cuba. I was asked earlier in 1966, 67, what was the membership of the party? It's about 10,000, about 50,000 supporters. And through the years of harassments, jailings, murders such as Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, who was murdered there in Chicago by the police. Fred Hampton was asleep when he was machine gunned. All of these things caused the party to slowly lose membership. So that the number 200 didn't happen just when I got back from Cuba. It was over a long period of time. I really couldn't not really imagine any of our party members being murdered, even though that I knew that risk took place. I was in the county jail at the time of his murder. This was the day that Martin Luther King was assassinated. And after he was killed, then it was like that. I felt that anyone in the party, I felt the party vulnerable. So he was.
The first clip was from when Huey returned from his self-imposed exile in Cuba. He talks about some of the more high-profile and other murders of Panther members, the dwindling numbers because of these murders and arrests. Pretty much, the results of the attack on the Panther Party. And then the second clip is another clip from, from the Eyes on the Prize documentary, in which he talks about, actually being shot. Couldn't really imagine any of the members, actually being killed before little Bobby Hutton was murdered on the same day as Martin Luther King Jr., oddly enough. Yeah, I've read that before. I was reading Mumia's book on his time in the Panther Party. And he talked about how despite all the work they did and despite all they knew about the government's efforts to undermine movements both home and abroad, they were the guinea pigs for COINTELPRO, so they didn't, despite their knowledge of what the American government was capable of, they were still a little bit naive of how far they would go. Mumia talked about the fake letters that were being sent to different members. Obviously, between Huey and Eldridge during their split, a lot of fake letters were being sent to each other by the government, but also to other members in different branches, the New York branch, the Philly branch, I believe. And he talked about how the Panther Party says, most members would get these fake letters and just automatically believe them. Mainly because the idea of the government going that far just didn't seem fathomable to them. And this is what Huey was talking about, the idea of one of the members, any of the members being killed, wasn't something that had really crossed his mind. At least not at that point. This is the author of Revolutionary Suicide, so, eventually he did get the point, but, yeah, at that particular moment, being shocked, I guess, sounds like, but yeah. Well, that's pretty much it for this first episode of Words and Power. I think the final clip that I'm going to play here is again from the William F. Buckley show during the Q&A. This is, I think, a fitting clip considering that I would like Words and Power to be a show that's informative, educational, some would say. This is a clip of Huey describing his definition of education. So thanks again for tuning in. Hit like, subscribe, all those things. Peace.
And that we think that education means formal education, perhaps, or maybe it means political education, or define what do you mean. When I say education, I mean a lifting of the consciousness of the people, and where external stimuli will bombard the human organism, and then from that process you begin to have some sort of awareness of what's going on, because I agree with Sigmund Freud. That's the first step then into controlling what's wrong with you or the social forces. You have to know what you're dealing with to start. So when I say education, I mean it in the broadest sense of the word, that technical education. We're living in a very technical world now, thanks to the West, if you want to say thank you.